Delilah Hayes stepped off the train into Copper Springs, carrying a suitcase full of borrowed dresses and a lie she'd rehearsed for 300 miles, that she was a respectable widow seeking a fresh start, rather than a woman who'd fled her own wedding an hour before the ceremony, leaving behind a groom whose fortune had turned out to be built on considerably darker business than she'd ever suspected. She hadn't discovered the truth about Randall Prescott until the night before their wedding, when she'd overheard him discussing with chilling casualness an arrangement involving stolen railroad shipments and a considerable bribe paid to a corrupt local judge. She'd fled before dawn, taking nothing but what she could carry, terrified that Randall's connections extended far enough that he might send men after her regardless of the embarrassment a public pursuit would cause. Copper Springs seemed distant enough, unfamiliar enough, to offer genuine safety until she nearly collided, stepping off the platform, with a broad-shouldered man wearing a Marshal's badge. "Apologies," Delilah said quickly, gathering her scattered composure. "No harm done," the Marshal said, studying her with careful, assessing grey eyes. He was younger than she'd expected for someone carrying such evident authority. Dark-haired, with the weathered look of a man who spent considerable time outdoors. "Marshal Nathaniel Reed, don't believe I recognize you, ma'am." "Delilah Hayes," she said, offering her mother's maiden name without hesitation, old instinct for self-preservation kicking in immediately.
"I'm hoping to settle here, actually."
"Seeking honest work, if Copper Springs has need of it. We can generally find something suitable," Nathaniel said, though something in his careful gaze suggested he'd noticed considerably more than her carefully composed introduction revealed. The fine quality of her travel, dress despite her claimed need for work, the nervous glances she kept casting back toward the train, the faint tremor in her voice that suggested fear rather than simple travel exhaustion. "You're traveling alone," he observed, not quite a question. "I am," Delilah confirmed, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "That's unusual enough for a woman of evident means," Nathaniel said. "Might I ask what brings you to Copper Springs specifically, rather than somewhere considerably larger and more accommodating?" "I wanted somewhere quiet," Delilah said. The partial truth easier to deliver than complete fabrication. "Somewhere I might build a life away from complications I've left behind." Something in her careful phrasing seemed to catch his attention, though he didn't press further, instead offering to walk her toward the town's small boarding house, maintaining polite, professional distance despite his evident curiosity about her circumstances. "Copper Springs is a good town," he said as they walked. "Small enough that everyone eventually knows everyone else's business, but honest enough that most folks extend fair welcome to genuine newcomers." "That sounds precisely what I'm seeking," Delilah said, though something in his phrasing, "everyone eventually knows everyone else's business," settled uneasily in her stomach, given how thoroughly she intended keeping her actual history hidden from this town's collective knowledge. She had no way of knowing, walking beside Marshal Nathaniel Reed through Copper Springs' dusty main street, exactly how complicated her careful anonymity would prove to maintain, given his evident perceptiveness and the considerable danger still pursuing her from the wedding. She'd fled. The boarding house, run by a brisk widow named Henrietta Combs, offered Delilah modest but genuine shelter, though her dwindling funds meant she required employment. Quickly to sustain even this basic accommodation, Nathaniel proved unexpectedly helpful in that regard, recommending her the following morning to the town's dressmaker, Opal Winters, who needed skilled assistance given her own advancing age and failing eyesight. "You've got a fine hand with needlework," Opal observed, examining Delilah's careful stitching during her brief demonstration. "Where'd you learn such refined skill?" "My mother taught me," Delilah said carefully, offering the partial truth rather than elaborate fabrication. She believed proper needlework, essential for any respectable woman's education. "Well, your mother taught you properly," Opal said approvingly. "I could use steady help, given how my eyes have worsened these past years. Pay's modest but honest, and you'll have steady work through most seasons." The arrangement settled Delilah's immediate practical concerns. Though her nervous watchfulness remained constant, flinching at unfamiliar riders, sleeping poorly despite the safety of her small boarding house room, constantly anticipating that Randall's pursuit might eventually locate her, despite her careful flight. Nathaniel's continued attention, meanwhile, proved considerably more persistent than she'd anticipated. He found frequent, seemingly legitimate reasons to visit Opal's dress shop, delivering messages, checking on the elderly seamstress's welfare, occasionally simply stopping for conversation during his regular patrol rounds. You handle yourself with considerable poise. For someone claiming humble background, he observed one afternoon, watching her efficiently manage the shop's considerable inventory with practiced competence. "I've had adequate practice," Delilah said, keeping her attention fixed on her work rather than his watchful gaze. "Practice from where, precisely?" Nathaniel asked. The question, delivered with deceptive casualness, she recognized as anything but idle curiosity. "Does it particularly matter?" Delilah asked, allowing genuine frustration to color her voice. "I'm performing honest work, Marshal. I wasn't aware Copper Springs required detailed accounting of every arrival's personal history before extending basic welcome." Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, not quite apology, but acknowledgement that he'd pressed further than strictly fair. "You're right, Miss Hayes. My apologies. Marshal's habits die hard, I suppose." "I understand the impulse," Delilah said, softening slightly despite herself. "Though I'd appreciate being judged by my conduct here, rather than whatever history I've chosen not to share." "Fair enough," Nathaniel agreed, though something in his careful gaze suggested his curiosity remained far from satisfied, simply redirected toward patience rather than direct questioning. Over the following weeks, that pattern continued, Nathaniel's visits remaining frequent, his questions growing more careful, though Delilah remained constantly aware of his watchful attention, sensing that he was slowly, methodically building understanding of her character, even without direct confession of her actual history. It was during one such visit that Delilah found herself unexpectedly relaxing into genuine conversation, laughing properly for what felt like the first time in weeks at some dry observation Nathaniel offered about a particularly troublesome local rancher, and realizing with sudden, uncomfortable clarity that her careful guardedness around him had begun, gradually and against her better judgment, to soften into something considerably warmer than professional wariness. That realization frightened her considerably, given how thoroughly her judgment regarding Randall had already failed her once. The threat Delilah had feared finally materialized. Nearly 2 months after her arrival, a stranger arrived in Copper Springs, asking pointed questions at the saloon about a woman matching her description, claiming to represent interests connected to a prominent businessman whose fiancée had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Delilah learned this from Henrietta, who delivered the news with evident concern. "Man's asking around town. Description matches you closely enough that I thought you'd want warning," Henrietta said. "Says he's working for some businessman named Prescott, searching for his missing bride." Delilah's hands trembled as panic flooded through her. "I never meant to bring danger to your establishment, Henrietta. Whatever you're running from, girl, you've worked honestly here these past weeks," Henrietta said firmly. "That matters more to me than whatever this stranger claims he's chasing." Nathaniel arrived at the boarding house that same evening, having heard similar reports through his own network, expression carrying evident concern. "You need to tell me the truth now, Delilah," he said quietly, once they'd found private conversation. "Whatever you've been hiding. I can't properly protect you without understanding the actual danger." Delilah's composure finally cracked, months of careful concealment giving way to complete, exhausted confession. "My real name is Delilah Marsh. I was engaged to marry Randall Prescott, a wealthy businessman in the capital. I discovered, the night before our wedding, that his fortune was built on stolen railroad shipments and corrupt judicial bribery. I fled before the ceremony, terrified of what marriage to such a man might eventually require of me, and terrified of his considerable influence and connections." Nathaniel listened without interruption, processing her confession with evident care. And this man asking questions. He's working for Prescott. Searching for you? It seems so, Delilah said, fear evident despite her attempt at composure. Randall's pride wouldn't easily accept public humiliation of being abandoned before his own wedding. I imagine he's determined to either force my return or ensure I face consequences for the embarrassment I've caused him. He won't touch you, Nathaniel said firmly, something protective and determined entering his voice. Whatever influence he believes he carries, Copper Springs isn't easily intimidated by outside wealth, particularly regarding matters of a woman's genuine safety and choice. You believe me? Delilah asked, disbelief evident. Despite everything, the false name, the concealed history. I've watched you work honestly these past 2 months, Nathaniel said. Watched your genuine character demonstrated repeatedly through kindness toward Opal, through honest labor, through careful, considerate conduct throughout our entire acquaintance. That character doesn't align with whatever scandalous narrative Prescott's man might be spreading. I trust what I've personally witnessed considerably more than second-hand claims from a stranger representing questionable interests. The relief that flooded through Delilah at his steady acceptance nearly overwhelmed her entirely. Months of solitary fear finally feeling considerably less overwhelming given his evident, determined support. What happens now? She asked. The stranger, a hard-eyed man named Garrett Voss, confronted Nathaniel directly at the Marshal's office the following morning, presenting documentation, claiming legal authority to return Delilah to Prescott's custody based on an alleged breach of marriage contract. There's no legal binding that forces a woman into marriage against her will, Nathaniel said flatly, reviewing the documents with evident skepticism. Whatever financial arrangement existed between Prescott and Miss Marsh's family, it doesn't grant you authority to forcibly return an unwilling woman anywhere. Mr. Prescott simply wishes to speak with her, Voss said, though his cold demeanor suggested considerably more sinister intent. Clear up whatever misunderstanding prompted her hasty departure. She's welcome to speak with him if she chooses, Nathaniel said, but that choice belongs entirely to her, not to you or Prescott's demands. Voss departed with evident frustration, though his parting glance carried clear warning that this confrontation was far from concluded. That evening, Nathaniel found Delilah at the boarding house, relaying the encounter with careful attention to her reaction. He'll return, Delilah said, old fear resurfacing. Randall doesn't accept defeat easily, Nathaniel. If Voss can't manage this through legal pretense, he'll likely attempt something considerably more direct. Then we'll be prepared, Nathaniel said firmly. I've already wired the Territorial Marshal's office, requesting formal investigation into Prescott's business dealings. Given what you've told me about the stolen railroad shipments and judicial corruption, if we can establish legal grounds against him directly, his pursuit of you becomes considerably more complicated. The investigation proceeded over the following days, Nathaniel coordinating with territorial authorities while maintaining careful watch over Delilah's safety, escorting her personally between the boarding house and Opal's shop, ensuring she was never left entirely unprotected. Given the evident danger Voss represented, I appreciate your protection, Delilah told him one evening, though I confess, I worry about the risk you're accepting on my behalf. Prescott's influence extends considerably further than most local disputes you likely handle. I don't intend backing away from protecting someone simply because the opposing threat carries considerable wealth, Nathaniel said firmly. Wealth doesn't grant moral authority, Delilah, regardless of how thoroughly Prescott apparently believes otherwise. Something warm bloomed in Delilah's chest at his steady conviction, a gratitude mixing with the growing affection she'd been carefully trying to suppress given the danger surrounding her circumstances. I find myself increasingly grateful, she admitted, not merely for your protection, but for your genuine character throughout this entire ordeal. You've shown me these past months exactly the kind of steady partnership I never properly experienced with Randall. I intend continuing to show you that, Nathaniel said, reaching for her hand with careful deliberation. for as long as you'll allow me the privilege. Randall Prescott himself arrived in Copper Springs 1 week later, considerably more direct than his hired man had proven, requesting formal meeting with Delilah under the guise of civilized conversation, though his cold eyes carried evident, barely restrained fury beneath careful composure. "You've caused me considerable embarrassment," Randall said, once Nathaniel had reluctantly permitted the meeting, insisting on remaining present throughout, fleeing before our wedding, spreading whatever lies you've apparently told this Marshal about my business dealings. "I told him the truth," Delilah said, refusing to let fear color her voice. "I overheard your conversation about the stolen railroad shipments, Randall, about the judge you bribed. I couldn't marry a man capable of such deception and corruption." "Business matters you don't properly understand," Randall said dismissively. "Regardless, you owe me proper explanation for the humiliation you've caused, and proper return to fulfill our marriage arrangement." "She owes you nothing," Nathaniel interjected sharply. "Territorial Marshal's office is currently investigating your business dealings. Prescott, based on the information Miss Marsh provided, I'd suggest focusing your energy on that considerable legal complication, rather than continuing to harass a woman who's made her choice regarding your proposed marriage entirely clear." Randall's composure cracked considerably at the mention of formal investigation. "You're bluffing." "I'm not," Nathaniel said flatly. "Wire arrived this morning confirming federal interest in your railroad dealings, alongside the judicial corruption allegations. I'd suggest securing proper legal counsel, rather than continuing to pursue matters here in Copper Springs." The revelation clearly shook Randall's confidence, his evident fury tempering into calculated retreat as he recognized the genuine legal danger his own actions now represented. "This isn't finished," he said, though his threat carried considerably less weight given the mounting legal complications he now faced. "Whatever protection you believe this Marshal provides, Delilah, my reach extends considerably further than this small town." Once Randall had departed, Delilah found herself trembling with released tension, Nathaniel's steady presence beside her offering considerable comfort despite the lingering uncertainty about Randall's continued threat. "Thank you," she said softly, "for standing beside me through that confrontation, and for the investigation you initiated to properly address his corruption." "I couldn't let him simply intimidate you into submission," Nathaniel said. "Whatever wealth and influence he believes protects him, genuine corruption deserves proper legal consequence, Delilah. I intend seeing that consequence properly delivered." The following weeks brought escalating legal complications for Randall Prescott. Federal investigators uncovering considerable evidence supporting Delilah's claims about stolen railroad shipments and judicial bribery, the mounting scandal occupying his attention far more urgently than continued pursuit of his fled bride. "It seems his own crimes have finally caught up with him," Nathaniel reported, reviewing updated correspondence from the Territorial Marshal's office. "Federal prosecutors are building formal charges, Delilah. Whatever threat he represented toward you specifically appears considerably diminished, given his own legal troubles now demanding his complete attention. I confess I feel a complicated mixture of relief and lingering unease," Delilah admitted. "Relief that his pursuit seems genuinely ended. Unease that he might still attempt retaliation once his legal troubles are somehow resolved. Federal charges of this magnitude rarely resolve quickly or favorably for the accused," Nathaniel said. "I suspect Prescott's attention will remain entirely consumed by his own legal defense for considerable time, leaving you genuinely free to build your life here without continued threat." The reassurance settled something anxious in Delilah's chest, and over the following weeks she found herself gradually relaxing into Copper Springs' rhythm without the constant underlying fear that had characterized her first months in town. Her relationship with Nathaniel, meanwhile, continued deepening through this period of relative peace, their careful courtship progressing through shared meals, evening walks, and increasingly honest conversation about both their pasts and their hopes for whatever future might unfold together. "I've been considering something," Nathaniel said one evening. walking together toward the edge of town where the sunset painted the surrounding hills in brilliant gold. Given everything we've navigated together these past months, and given how thoroughly my feelings toward you have grown. What sort of consideration? Delilah asked, though something in his tone suggested she already anticipated the answer. I find myself hoping, Nathaniel said carefully, that you might consider building a permanent future here in Copper Springs. Not simply as Opal's assistant hiding behind careful anonymity, but as yourself properly, alongside someone who's come to care for you rather completely. Delilah's breath caught at the implication. Months of fear and careful guardedness finally giving way to genuine hope for the future. He was tentatively proposing. Are you asking what I believe you're asking, Nathaniel? Not quite yet, Nathaniel said, something warm and nervous in his voice. But I wanted you to understand my intentions clearly, before I eventually manage asking properly. That proper asking arrived 3 weeks later. During Copper Springs' autumn harvest celebration, the whole town gathered for festivities that mirrored, in their genuine communal warmth, the same tradition Delilah had heard existed in numerous small, territorial towns throughout the region. Nathaniel found her during a quieter moment away from the main celebration, his nervous energy evident despite his usual steady composure. Delilah, he said, taking her hands in his. I came into this position believing myself content with solitary duty, protecting Copper Springs, without particular expectation of genuine personal happiness. You arrived here, fleeing danger and carrying considerable fear, and somehow, over these past months, taught me that genuine happiness remained entirely possible. He knelt properly then, producing a simple ring that caught the lantern light. Marry me. Build a genuine life together here, free from whatever danger and deception once threatened your safety and happiness. Delilah's eyes filled with grateful tears. Yes, she said, laughing through her emotion. Of course it's yes, Nathaniel Reed. The surrounding festival goers, several of whom had clearly anticipated this exact moment, broke into spontaneous applause, Henrietta dabbing enthusiastically at her own eyes nearby. News of the engagement spread through Copper Springs with predictable warmth, the whole community rallying around the couple whose courtship they'd watched develop through genuine adversity and danger these past months. Wedding preparations began almost immediately, Opal insisting on crafting Delilah's dress personally despite her failing eyesight, the elderly seamstress finding particular joy in contributing to the happiness of the young woman who'd become considerably more than simple employee these past months. I want this dress perfect, Opal said, carefully measuring fabric despite Delilah's protests about overexertion. You've brought genuine light to this shop, Delilah. At least I can manage his proper craftsmanship for your wedding gown. It was during these preparations that word arrived from the territorial capital, Randall. Prescott's trial had concluded, resulting in considerable conviction on multiple counts of fraud, theft and judicial corruption, sentencing him to lengthy imprisonment that effectively ended any remaining threat toward Delilah's safety. It's genuinely, completely over, Delilah said, relief flooding through her upon receiving the news. Whatever danger Randall represented, it's entirely resolved now. Completely, Nathaniel confirmed, embracing her warmly. You're free now, Delilah, in every possible sense, to build whatever future you choose. 2 weeks before the wedding, Delilah received unexpected correspondence, a letter from her own estranged mother, whom she'd left behind during her hasty flight from the failed wedding, having been too terrified and ashamed to properly explain her circumstances before departing. My dearest Delilah, the letter read, having apparently tracked her location through mutual acquaintances aware of the Prescott scandal, I followed news of Randall's conviction with considerable relief. Understanding now the genuine danger, you fled rather than simple wedding day cowardice I initially assumed. I would be honored to attend your upcoming wedding, if you'll permit reconciliation after our painful extended silence. Delilah read the letter several times, old hurt and cautious hope warring uncomfortably. I never properly explained my reasons for fleeing, she admitted to Nathaniel. My mother believed I'd simply panicked, embarrassed our family through cowardly abandonment of the wedding. I was too ashamed and frightened to properly correct that assumption before leaving. Perhaps it's not too late to build proper reconciliation, Nathaniel suggested gently. Given everything you've navigated these past months, extending that same courage toward reconnecting with your mother might prove similarly worthwhile. Delilah penned careful response, extending invitation alongside honest explanation of everything she'd discovered about Randall's true character before fleeing. Delilah's mother, Margaret Marsh, arrived 1 week before the wedding, the reunion carrying evident awkwardness initially, months of painful silence, requiring careful navigation before genuine warmth could properly re-establish itself between them. I should have trusted your judgment more thoroughly, Margaret admitted. Once Delilah had properly explained the full circumstances of her flight, I allowed embarrassment over the failed wedding to override proper concern for your actual well-being and safety. We were both navigating difficult circumstances, Delilah said, extending grace toward her mother despite the painful months of separation. Perhaps it's not too late to build something better going forward. Over the following days, careful reconciliation took proper shape between mother and daughter, old wounds slowly healing through honest conversation. Neither had believed themselves capable of restoring so completely. The wedding day arrived clear and bright. Copper Springs' small church decorated simply with autumn wildflowers, the whole community turning out to witness a union representing, for many who'd watched Delilah's journey, genuine triumph over considerable danger and deception. Margaret helped her dress, the reconciled mother-daughter bond, evident in the careful attention she brought to the final preparations. Your father would be so proud, Margaret said softly, adjusting Delilah's veil. Watching you build this happiness after everything you navigated to reach it properly. The wedding celebration continued at the town hall, transformed for the occasion with considerable decoration, the whole community gathering to celebrate alongside them. Opal beaming with evident pride at the dress she'd crafted, Henrietta and Margaret finding easy companionship discussing wedding preparations. They'd both contributed toward. It feels remarkably fitting, Delilah observed, watching the joyful celebration unfold, building this happiness here, in the very town where I first sought refuge from danger. Copper Springs has witnessed considerable transformation these past months, Nathaniel agreed. Alongside our own relationship's development from wary strangers into genuine partnership. Winter settled over Copper Springs within months of the wedding. Married life settling into comfortable, genuine rhythm considerably different from the careful wariness that had characterized Delilah's initial arrival. Opal's shop continued thriving under their combined management, Delilah's careful business sense complementing the elderly seamstress's remaining skill, while Nathaniel's Marshal duties continued steadily. Copper Springs remaining genuinely safe under his careful watch. It was during a quiet winter evening that Nathaniel raised a topic he'd apparently been considering carefully. I've been thinking about children, Delilah. Whether you've considered that, given everything you experienced during your engagement to Randall. I confess I avoided considering such happiness during that engagement, Delilah admitted, given how little genuine warmth existed in that arrangement. But with you, I find myself genuinely hoping for that particular joy. Spring brought news that filled their small home with considerable joy. Delilah's confirmation of pregnancy met with the same overwhelming wonder Nathaniel had expressed during his proposal months before. A baby, he said, disbelief and joy warring across his weathered features. Delilah, we're actually going to have a child. The news spread quickly through Copper Springs, the community that had witnessed Delilah's entire transformation, rallying with genuine warmth around the announcement. Margaret writing immediately with excited plans for extended visits, and Delilah's pregnancy progressed through summer. An unexpected complication arose. Word arrived that Randall Prescott had somehow secured early release from prison, based on a legal technicality, his continued bitterness apparently undiminished by his considerable time served. He won't simply forget this, will he? Delilah said. worry evident despite her advancing pregnancy. "I won't let him near you," Nathaniel said firmly, already coordinating with territorial authorities regarding proper protective measures given this unexpected development. Nathaniel's careful vigilance proved warranted when Randall attempted approaching Copper Springs weeks later, only to be intercepted by federal marshals, who'd been specifically monitoring his movements. Given his history of harassment and the legitimate concern his release had generated, he's been returned to custody, Nathaniel reported with evident relief. Violation of his release conditions given his attempted approach toward you despite explicit restrictions against such contact. The threat, though genuinely frightening while it unfolded, proved ultimately short-lived. Randall's violation resulting in extended imprisonment that finally, definitively ended any remaining danger he represented. Their daughter arrived in early autumn, healthy and strong, named Grace at Delilah's insistence, representing, she explained, the grace and genuine second chance Copper Springs and Nathaniel had offered her when she'd arrived carrying nothing but fear and careful deception. "She's perfect," Nathaniel said, holding his daughter with evident overwhelmed wonder. Margaret arrived within days, immediately smitten with her new granddaughter, the reconciled family bond deepening considerably through this joyful arrival. As Grace grew through her first year, Copper Springs continued flourishing alongside the small family, Opal's shop expanding considerably. Under Delilah's increasingly confident management, Nathaniel's reputation as a steady, trustworthy marshal, drawing considerable community respect and admiration. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Nathaniel asked one evening. "How different everything might have unfolded. Had you chosen differently at that train platform?" "Constantly," Delilah admitted, "though I find myself grateful beyond measure for exactly how things actually unfolded." 2 years after her desperate arrival, Delilah found herself reflecting on the remarkable transformation her life had undergone. Watching Nathaniel teach young Grace, now toddling with determined curiosity, simple words during his rare moments away from martial duty. "She's going to be as stubborn as her mother," Henrietta observed fondly, having become something of an honorary grandmother to Grace over these past months. "I'll take that as compliment," Delilah said, laughing as she watched her daughter's evident fascination with everything around her. Spring arrived once more, confirmation of a second pregnancy filling their small family with renewed joy. Nathaniel's overwhelmed, wonder evident once again, despite this being their second such announcement. "Another child," he said, drawing Delilah close. "Our family's growing even further." Standing together watching Grace play nearby, anticipating their second child's arrival, Delilah found herself overwhelmed with gratitude for the complete transformation her life had undergone since that desperate flight from her wedding. Their son, named Theodore after Nathaniel's late father, arrived that autumn, completing their small family with genuine joy that mirrored the happiness they'd built together from such initially uncertain, dangerous beginnings. "2 children now," Nathaniel said, watching Grace cautiously peer at her new baby brother with evident curiosity. "Our family's considerably fuller than I ever anticipated." Arriving at that train platform, expecting simply another day of routine martial duty. As Theodore grew through his first year, Copper Springs itself continued its steady growth, the town's population expanding alongside increasing commerce, requiring Nathaniel to eventually deputize additional help managing the growing territory's law enforcement needs. Delilah, meanwhile, found herself increasingly drawn toward community involvement beyond simple shop management, eventually helping establish a proper schoolhouse for the town's growing number of children, drawing on her own education to help shape the curriculum alongside the newly hired teacher. By their 5th anniversary, Nathaniel and Delilah had built something considerably beyond what either had imagined possible during those uncertain early days: a thriving family, genuine community standing, restored connection with Delilah's mother, and a home filled with warmth and security that stood in stark contrast to the fear and deception that had characterized her initial flight from Randall Prescott. "Do you remember," Delilah said, "the two of them sharing a quiet evening on their porch? How uncertain everything felt. That very first conversation at the train platform?" "I remember," Nathaniel said, smiling at the memory. "You were determined to convince me you were simply seeking quiet. Respectable employment, despite evident fear and considerable concealment." Grace, now 5 and increasingly curious about the world, began asking pointed questions about her mother's history. Questions Delilah had anticipated, but not quite prepared herself to properly answer. "Mama, why did you come to Copper Springs?" Grace asked one evening. Delilah considered carefully how much truth a 5-year-old's understanding could properly bear. "I was in a difficult situation, sweetheart, before I came here. A man wanted to make choices for my life that weren't fair, and I needed somewhere safe to build a new beginning. Your father offered me that safety." Anniversary as a properly established town. The community organized considerable celebration. Nathaniel and Delilah's family standing as one of the town's most respected and beloved households. Their journey from crisis into genuine happiness serving as something of local legend among the community that had witnessed it unfold. "We've built quite a life here," Nathaniel observed, watching the town celebration unfold around them. Grace and Theodore, both delighted participants in the festivities. News arrived that spring that Randall Prescott had died in prison, his considerable bitterness apparently having consumed him entirely during his extended imprisonment, the final resolution of whatever danger he'd once represented arriving with complicated, mixed emotion rather than simple relief. "I feel strange receiving this news," Delilah admitted. "Relief that whatever threat remained is now entirely ended, but also strange sadness for a life so thoroughly consumed by greed and bitterness." "That's a natural response," Nathaniel said gently. "Compassion doesn't require forgetting the harm someone caused, Delilah. Simply acknowledging the tragedy of a wasted life, alongside genuine relief that his choices no longer threaten your safety and happiness." Their family continued growing and flourishing through the following years. Copper Springs itself transforming from small territorial outpost into a genuinely thriving town. Nathaniel and Delilah's combined contributions, his steady law enforcement, her community involvement through the schoolhouse, and Opal's now thriving shop, helping shape that transformation considerably. "We've built something remarkable," Delilah observed, watching their now 3 children, a third daughter, Rose, having arrived 2 years after Theodore, play together in their considerably expanded home's yard. "We built it together," Nathaniel said, echoing sentiments that had defined their partnership from its very earliest, uncertain days. Every step of this journey together, as their eldest daughter Grace approached her own 8th birthday, considerably wise beyond her years given the family history. She'd gradually learned throughout her childhood. She found herself reflecting the particular wisdom her parents had modeled throughout her upbringing. "I'm glad you were brave enough to run away from that bad man." Years later, when their children would ask how their family came to call Copper Springs home, Delilah would tell them about a desperate flight from a wedding built on deception, and a Marshal who'd offered genuine protection without demanding immediate trust in return. Nathaniel would simply say a remarkably resilient woman had walked into his town carrying considerable fear, and left, having taught him that genuine partnership required patience, honesty, and unwavering support through whatever danger or difficulty life might present. Copper Springs remembered their story with considerable fondness through the years that followed. The Marshal who'd protected a frightened stranger, the corrupt businessman's downfall, the family built from crisis into lasting joy and genuine community standing. But every version of the story, told and retold throughout the town's continued growth, ended precisely the same way. 2 people who'd chosen, deliberately and completely, to build something considerably stronger than fear or deception ever could, a partnership rooted in genuine trust, flowing onward through whatever seasons life brought their way, exactly as steady and enduring as the Marshal's own unwavering character had promised from that very first, Uncertain meeting at the Copper Springs train platform.